Let's continue exploring the universe within art and the art behind Minion Masters. I'm your host, OmLedu, and for this video, I want to go over some more tips and tricks to help out the new player. Mainly what to spend your resources on, what cards are generically good to craft, tips on building a balanced deck, as well as taking a look at all of the legendaries and see which ones might give you the most value. This video was requested by Candy Channel. Thank you so much for leaving a comment, and I really hope this helps you out. But before we take a look at the cards, it's always nice to check your special and daily offers. You can get free rubies from the special ones, and you get a free random thing each day from the daily ones. And sometimes you can get really great stuff at a huge discount in the daily offers. I always try to keep at least 10,000 gold just in case something pops up that I really want. Like you can even buy legendaries in the daily offers sometimes. You can even get discounted tokens sometimes in the daily offers. Buying the 10 pack for 9,000 is always great, but I would recommend, saving around 10,000 gold just in case something does pop up that you really want. Like sometimes you can buy 15 tokens at a huge discount. And always check the special offers for free rubies. And now on to the most exciting part, and that is what cards you should craft. Now this game is constantly updated, so it's really hard to say what is going to be the best cards and what is going to be the worst. Basically every season, they nerf the good cards and buff the bad ones. So really at any given time, the information on these cards might change. New players especially are going to be drawn to these expensive cards, thinking that they're so amazing and that they just need to craft them all. But in reality, the most important cards cost 2 mana. Because really, you should only have 1 or 2 high cost cards in your entire deck. That is one of the biggest mistakes that I see new players make, is overloading on high cost cards. And unlike most games, the legendaries are not the end all be all. You don't need to have legendaries in order to win. In fact, some of the best cards are commons and rares. But of course, legendaries are still really cool, so we'll talk about those later on. But the cards that you'll be using the most basically cost 2 mana. So you really can't go wrong by crafting any of the following, like the Grenadier can kill small hordes, the Scrat Pack can overwhelm slow attackers, Swarmers gives you really good DPS, Propeller Scrats can kill ground units, the Elite Swarmer has amazing health, the Stint is great bridge control and anti-air, Tantrum Throwers gives you a rage trigger and can kill an air unit. Then you have like Crazy Bats, the Lone Scout, Slitherbound, the Sewer Scrat. All of these are fantastic cards that can give you phenomenal value. Also the Skeleton Crew, the Bounceberry Flinger, and the Mana Chaser. All of these 2-drops give you really cheap support units that can help out your big dudes, but they can even counter certain expensive cards all by themselves. And they give you a really cheap way to grab the bridges, which is the most important part of the game. Now, of course, some of these, like the Bounceberry Flingers, are more for certain other cards. Like the Bounceberry Flingers isn't great on its own, or the Stint isn't great on its own, but if you're using Zen Chi or Outlander tech, then the Bounceberry Flinger or the Stint is definitely the way to go. But odds are that you will see and or use all of the cards that I have just mentioned, so they are really great early purchases, and they're all just commons and rares. Like if we take a quick look at the leaderboards, you'll see 2-drops everywhere. Every deck has like 2, 3, 4 2-drops, just 2-drops everywhere, and that's because they can give you such tremendous value. Where like single mana cards are mostly puffs, things that can't attack, and cards that cost more than 2 are more of an investment. If you lose them without them getting any value because they get countered or killed by a spell, that's painful. But 2-drops can capture bridges, they can provide support, they can keep your big dudes alive, sometimes they can even counter more expensive cards, giving you tremendous value. Another way for you to think about it is that your 2-drops are your backbone, your 4 to 5 mana cards are your counters, and your expensive dudes are your win conditions. And so if you have a really strong backbone and you get really good at using these cheap cards, they will take you far all on their own. It won't matter what big dude you're using, because you'll be able to support him really well with all of these various 2-drops. And then of course, the ones that you actually end up using depend on the current meta, they depend on what big dudes you're using, like if you need extra air support, or if you need bigger ground units, or if you need some hordes, or some AoE, some horde control. And even though these should be some of your top played cards, you will probably change them a lot more often than you will your big dudes, just depending on what the meta is at any given time. As an example, if you like using Fergus or the Reckonator, both of these hit all ground units, meaning they have AoE, but they can't hit air. So your support units, you probably don't need the Grenadier or other AoE, But you do need some sort of flying control. Since your main big dudes can't hit flying, maybe you have flying of your own, or you have some ranged units as your support. And then depending on what the meta is, which of these support units you actually use will change. Like the Slitherbound is really good at poisoning big dudes. Or if your go-to big guy is a single slow attacker, well then maybe you need extra AoE, you need some extra hordes to distract things, maybe you need some flying since he can't hit air. So like, all of these support cards are great, but they will change depending on what big card you're using, what master you're using, and what other people are using. Another benefit to using 2 mana cheap cards is that it keeps the average cost of your deck low. You want an average mana cost of 3.5 to 3.7 for your deck. If your average mana cost is higher than this, you won't be able to play cards fast enough to control the bridges or to come up with counters. Not only that, but if you misplay or if they counter you, it's a lot more painful if your cards are expensive. But like for this deck, for example, our 2 big cards are Fergus and Bulf, so we have an AoE and a single attacker. Then we have a few mid-cost cards to strongly counter specific things, but as for our cheap dudes, a lot of them are ranged or air. Since Bulf and Fergus can't hit air, we want our cheap support units to be able to hit air. Another thing to mention is that all decks basically should have 2 damaging spells, and that's what we're going to talk about next, is our spells. So if our cheap 2 mana dudes are our backbone because they can support our big dudes and grab bridges, your 2 kill spells are your arms. They allow you to control what's going on the field at any given time. Like the Shock Rock is a cheap way to kill scrats or to stun big scary things to give you an extra attack. The Frost Feathers is a really great way to kill snipers. The Impetus Blast and the Daggerfall are also really good cheap horde control. Hypnotize can turn big dudes on each other so that they kill each other. The Sunburn is really good at killing hordes and giving your units rage. The Arcane Bolt and Pincer of Dread are really good single target spells, as is the Lightning Bolt, except that you can't target which minion it kills. Morgul's Mark is a fantastic spell, so is Chain Lightning and the Wheel of Doom. And really all of these spells are great, but some of them are harder to learn than others. All spells will take you a while to get used to, so I would recommend practicing with all of these, except some things like Hypnotize or Impetus Blast or Sunburn, it might be really hard for you to get value out of them until you learn them. So I'll try to focus more on the easy to use spells like Chain Lightning. So all of the spells that you see now are fairly easy to learn. Again, spells are one of the hardest things for new players to learn when and where and why to use them. One thing to keep in mind is that you want your spells to either counter things that your deck is weak against, or you want them to help you win encounters so that your minions survive so that you hold the bridge. Don't just use spells just to deal some damage. That's one of the biggest mistakes that I see new players make, is misusing their spells. But that's something that you just have to learn and pay attention to. And then also which spells you end up using will really depend on your other cards. So even though spells are one of the most important parts of your deck, you kind of need to pick your other cards first before you know which 2 spells you should use. Do you need to take out flyers? Do you need to take out single big targets? Are you weak against horde? These are all questions that will be answered by the other cards in your deck. But when in doubt, Chain Lightning and Daggerfall are a great place to start. They're both super easy to use and cover most things. And as an example, if we have 4 random 2 mana cards, then Daggerfall and Chain Lightning, we basically have the backbone in the arms of a deck. Next up, we need a couple of mid-range cards. So your mid-range cards are going to be really strong counters into specific things. I'm also going to include the 3 mana cards in this category, although they could be considered more support cards. Like the Crystal Archers and the Crystal Arcanist are both really, really good support cards, but they're frail. Like they're really good anti-air, anti-horde, but if they get attacked, they're going to die. They also have Mana Surge, which can be really good to train new players not to spend too much mana. That's a big thing I see new players do, is spend too much mana too quickly. You need to train yourself to be as conservative with your mana as you possibly can. Because in general, your goal is not to kill the opposing master, but to maintain control of the bridges. Another generically good 3-drop is the little Poison Pup. His initial spit does a ton of poison damage, and he has a bunch of health. Whereas the Cannon Roller is frail, but he can hard counter certain slow melee units because they can never catch up to him. Since the Assassin deals triple damage when attacking from stealth, he can usually kill a unit before he even gets attacked himself. Super duper good at single targets, whereas the Whirly Scrat is really good against hordes. He has a good chunk of HP, so he can just keep spinning and take out any horde that he needs to. Spear Throwers can take out air units and can help overwhelm slow single attackers like the Cleaver. The Curse Bearer can deal tons of damage to high health units. The Propeller Horde can be really fantastic if you have other units that have rage. The Windwalker can guarantee that you maintain bridge control and help you defend your side of the field at the same time. It does take a little bit of practice to use correctly, but it can be fantastic. And one of the best defensive units is the Storm Tamer. He can lift up single targets to where they can't attack or do anything. All of these are really great cards to learn how to use. They can provide generic value regardless of what other cards you're using. Now, like the Propeller Horde does require you to have units that have rage, or like the Crystal Archer or Crystal Arcanist are more support units. They're not necessarily going to hard counter things all by themselves since they're kind of frail. So I'm going to focus more on cards that can hard counter certain things, such as the Defenso Chopper. There are so many good melee units that the Chopper just shuts down, so it's a really great card to gain experience with. Then like the Scrat Tank is kind of the opposite. It shuts down ranged units. Basically, it can only be damaged when it's next to a unit, so it just eats up ranged attacks and doesn't take any damage from them. And a couple honorable mentions would be the Prowler and the Woodsman. These are two of the best 5-mana cards, but they're not necessarily hard counters to certain things. They're more for specific deck types. Whereas all the cards down here at the bottom will give you generic value. Now, like the Windwalker is a little difficult to learn how to use since it's supposed to basically grab the bridges or get into specific positions. But all of these right here are really easy to use. You basically play them and you can see their value just by watching them go. So I would definitely recommend playing with all of these cards just to get a feel for what all they can do. Like, I would highly recommend checking out the Defenso Chopper. It can just absolutely shut down so many different things. Like Propeller Hordes just melt when they come into contact with it, or like Scrat Hordes and things like that. But even like Fergus or the Reckonator get hard countered by the Defenso Chopper. And since Fergus and the Reckonator are AoE, your opponent most likely played them trying to kill a bunch of your units. And so then if you just throw the Defenso Chopper down, not only does it shut down these high mana cost cards, but it saves your other dudes that they were trying to kill in the first place. Oh, and I almost forgot about the Shadow Whelp. This is another fantastic hard counter to a bunch of things. It's kind of like the Assassin, in that it does triple damage when it's attacking from stealth, so it's basically guaranteed to get a kill, and it can attack air, it can attack ground, and it just keeps turning invisible, so it can be really, really hard to deal with. So that's all of my recommendations for the generically good mid-range cards. Usually you have room for about 2 of these in your deck, and also keep in mind that these are more expensive answers to specific problems. Like the Defenso Chopper can completely shut down Fergus, the Reckonator, melee hordes, whereas the Shadow Whelp can deal massive damage to single air targets or single ground targets, and can become uncontrollable if they don't have enough ranged or air. To recap where we're at, we have our 2 mid-range that are specific answers to annoying problems. We have our 2 damaging spells to help us control what's going on in the field. Then we have our cheap backbone units to support our big dudes and to capture the bridges. So something like this is starting to look fairly nice. The only thing that's left is our 2 high-cost cards to give us our win condition or like the main focus of the deck. So now let's go over all of the high-cost cards and talk about some of the generically good ones. Now, one thing about high-cost cards is a lot of them are legendary. But that isn't to say that you need to have legendary cards. So before we go over the super cool legendary cards, I'm going to turn off legendaries so that it's easier to go over the high cost cards and which ones are generically good. Oh, and I totally forgot about the Boom Buggy. That is another really fantastic mid-range card. It deals insane amounts of damage. It just kind of has some low health, so you want to put some bulk in front of it in order to protect it. And I did mention the Woodsman earlier, but he is super bulky and can do really good damage if you trigger his Revelry. So you will need some other Stoutheart minions in your deck if you want to use the Woodsman. But anyway, now on to the non-legendary expensive cards. So right off the bat, we have the Cleaver, who does incredible single attack damage. Then we have the ATG drone, which can survive most spells and just absolutely decimate ground units. Prowlers are always scary, and if you can trigger the sacrifice on the Rabbit Prowler, having one with Rage is terrifying. But of course, to trigger the sacrifice, you will need some Slitherbound. Another deck-specific card is the Dragon Pack. You want to play this with Voidborn cards to reduce its mana cost, but it can really punish people who don't have enough anti-air. The Harbinger, on the other hand, doesn't require any sort of specific deck in order to use it, and can also punish people who don't have good enough anti-air. The Blue Golem definitely wants to pick up a Growth Burst Shroom, so you do need some Zinchi in your deck, but even just including a single Bounceberry Flinger makes him a fantastic card. And yet another Slither sacrifice card, the Empowered Soul Stealer, can be absolutely amazing if you trigger the sacrifice. But the Shield Guard of Light doesn't require any sort of special activations. He is just absolutely fantastic and super bulky. Another great Empyrean with no special requirements is the Brother of the Burning Fist. The Red Golem also needs some Growth Burst Shrooms, so just having a Bounceberry Flinger in your deck is enough to power it, and it is super strong if you have taken 50% of your Master's health. These last two are quite expensive, but the Brothers of Light and the Jadespark Watchers are definitely really good. So we have several big Zinchi cards, which are super easy to use. Basically all you need is a Bounceberry Flinger to use the Golems or the Monkeys. But these five right here don't require any sort of special deck, and they are all generically fantastic. Like anytime I play against the Shield Guard of Light or the ATG drone, I get kind of worried. They can get incredible value, and they're just a common and a rare. And depending on what you're using, they can be really hard to get rid of, especially the drone. The drone is super punishing for people who don't have air units or don't have really good range. And now that we've selected our big guys, we can add in a few damaging spells, a couple of mid-range counters, and then our backbone support bridge grabbers. And really, this looks totally fine to me. It looks like you could actually win some games with this deck. And there's no legendaries at all, and only one Supreme, and even that one Supreme could just be exchanged by a different mid-range counter. The average mana is right on the mark at 3.7. We have Daggerfall in the Grenader for horde control, we have the Swarmers for bridge grabs and DPS. Then on top of our spells, we have the Lone Scout, the Bats, and the Shadow Dragon, all of which can take out flying units to protect our drone. And since it can target multiple ground units, as long as we can keep it alive with some anti-air, it should be really, really strong. Then we have the Curse Bearer for really high health single targets like the dragons. Then we have the Shield Guard of Light to give us some bulk on the field. And really, this looks balanced. It looks like it can take out pretty much everything. Just always keep in mind that with any new deck or any new card, it's going to take you a while to learn how to efficiently use that card. So anytime that you're learning new cards or new decks, be sure not to get discouraged. There will be a little bit of a learning curve and some growing pains. But as long as you power through, you will come out the other side a better and more knowledgeable player. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, let's talk about the legendaries. Which ones should you craft? So the two things that I would keep in mind is one, how complicated is that card to use? How long will it take you to learn? And two, how many decks can it go in? Like Mardred, Prince of Nightmares, can basically go in any deck that you want. Whereas Shrew Mama can only go in a Shrew Mama deck. In order to activate her abilities, you need a very specific deck to do that. Or like the Screaming Scrat, will take you a long time to actually figure out how to get value out of using it. So especially when starting off, it's nice to have ones that are easy to use and can be used with all sorts of different cards and in different decks. First up, we have the Snake Druid. Now he does have Slitherbind, but you don't actually need to use that. His main advantage is that he can immobilize single ground targets. So like the Colossus or the Golems, he can just lock them into place and let your other units kill them. Jolo the Hero Scrat is really great against slow attackers. His damage immunity makes it really hard to kill him with things like Cleavers or the Colossus. I see him being played all the time in all sorts of different decks. Another one I see used all the time is the Veil Stalker. She's really great at holding a bridge. She can take out a medium-sized unit or a horde all on her own, and she walks so slowly that if you don't have an answer for her, you just have to let her keep the bridge for a while. Like the Snake Druid, the Musketeer also has Slitherbind, but really his main advantage is he's a hard counter to most melee units. So even without using Slitherbind, he can give you really great value. The Wheel of Doom is a fantastic spell. Now it is a little bit better in teamers because there's more stuff on the field, but you can get incredible value out of this spell even in solos. The Spire Warden and the Chisma Boomstick are really fantastic support units. They do have fairly low health, so it's nice to keep them safe by placing big dudes in front of them, but like the Chisma Boomstick will run away on his own after he attacks, so he can kind of keep himself alive. The Wizard Puff not only can give you really good value, but it can also make your opponent misplay and make mistakes because they don't want to use their big units until after it dies. Shin Stormstrike does have Zenchi Flow and can benefit by picking up growth berries, but even without those, his ability to constantly stun things can give you extraordinary value. The Zip Zappinator is absolutely incredible. It really depends on who you're playing against, but he can just win you the game basically by himself because he can shut down so many different things. The Chief Icebreaker Bolf is a really fantastic card. You'll see him all the time. He shuts down single targets by freezing them so that you can overwhelm them with other units or just keep him alive because they can't attack him while they're frozen. Bara the Witch Wolf is another absolutely fantastic card. Not only does it deal really good AoE damage, but it locks all ground units down for 6 seconds, allowing you to keep bridges or prevent your opponent from taking bridges. The Reckonator is also super versatile and really great for bridge control. It puts so much pressure on a bridge and can just take out tons and tons of units. Fergus is another one of my favorite cards. He is really similar to the Reckonator in that they both do AoE ground damage, but Fergus deals higher DPS while he's spinning. Next up, we have a Kinlip, who is absolutely fantastic, but does have the ability Ring the Gong, which will take you a little bit of time to get, used to using it. Similarly to the Prime Sergeant Radek, who has the jump ability, anything with abilities is going to have a learning curve. Like the Stormcharger's Storm Charge can be absolutely devastating, but you have to learn how and when to use it. Similarly to Rindrad the Deathless, by himself he's not that great, but he resurrects things that he hits. So you want to play him where he hits something powerful so that he can resurrect it on your side. Or like the Colossus, is super easy to use, super easy to play, but you have to keep it alive. It can be countered by a lot of different things. And then finally, we have Mardred, Prince of Nightmares, which is honestly one of the best, most generic ones that you can use in basically any sort of deck. If you're wanting like an expensive card that can win you the game, Mardred is definitely the way to go. He can be absolutely devastating. So all in all, the ones that I would recommend crafting first are the ones that are easy to use and can go in basically any deck. Like Bara the Witch Wolf, the Reckonator, Fergus, the Chief Icebreaker Bolf, Mardred, the Prince of Nightmares. All of these are fantastic, and they're easy to use. They don't really have abilities for you to learn, and they can go in basically any deck. Now, I can't actually add some of these to the bottom because I haven't crafted them, like Mardred or like the Zip Zappinator, but they are fantastic. The Zip Zappinator is also one of those that you can get tremendous value for, and even though it has an ability, its ability is more of a power-up, so it's fairly easy to learn. Now, some of these cheaper legendaries are for more specific things. Like the Wizard Puff and the Shin Stormstrike are both really bad against Horde decks. The Wizard Puff wants to turn giant dudes into mana puffs, and Shin wants to go in 1v1s. He wants to stun them and then hit them and then stun them again. And since he has Zenchi Flow and can pick up growth berries, he always benefits from having a Zenchi deck. Or like the Chisma Boomstick is really good against hordes, or the Musketeer is really good against melee units. So especially the cheaper legendaries, it kind of matters what the rest of your cards are. Like Bolf can only hit single targets, so maybe he would go good with the Chisma Boomstick. Whereas the Musketeer maybe won't go good with Bolf because Bolf can take care of those single melee attackers. So just keep in mind that even with legendaries, the cheaper ones are going to be more for specific counters or for certain things that you're weak against. Like if you always struggle against Rammers and Colossus and Golems, the Snake Druid might be perfect for you. But he is really specialized, so if you're not struggling against big ground units, the Snake Druid won't really help you out. Where like the Veilstalker and Jolo are very generic. They can kind of go in any deck, and you'll always get value from them regardless. So all in all, these are the legendaries that I think are the easiest to use, and can go in the most decks without needing to build a specific deck around them. We also have Mardred and the Zip Zappinator. Don't forget about those. I definitely would have included them if I had crafted them. But like the Stun Monkey, for example, it will probably give you more value if you play it in a Zenchi deck, so that really probably shouldn't be in there. Or like the Wizard Puff and the Musketeer and the Snake Druid all have very specific counters that they're trying to play against. Even Jolo to an extent can get overwhelmed by things that attack really quickly. and stuff like that. So my top recommendations for easy to use generic legendaries would be these 5 plus Mardred plus the Zip Zapinator. Now Fergus is better in teamers than in solos, so if you're just playing solos, keep that in mind as well. Now also, these aren't necessarily the best of the best. Really there is no best of the best. These are just the easiest to use and can go in basically any deck with any other cards. Always remember that it's not the cards you have, it's how you use those cards. Unlike most card games, where you just stack your deck full of OP cards and then you win without even trying, in this game, you can win with cards that no one uses, if you are good with those cards. But even though it doesn't really matter what cards you use, what does matter is the balance of your deck. So let's use the deck I am currently using as an example to recap the deck construction tips that we went over. My average mana is 3.4, which is in the ideal range. Again, you want it somewhere in between 3.3 and 3.7. No higher or no lower. I have my 2 damaging spells to control what's going on in the game. I have my 2 expensive cards as my win condition. Then I have like the Reboomer and the Curse Bearer as my mid-range hard counters to certain things. Then I have my 4 cheap cards for my support and my bridge control. And even though the Reckonator can control hordes, I'm also using the Swarmer and the Reboomer and the Impetus Blast to help with cheaper hordes in case I can't afford to use the Reckonator. Then we also have the Crazy Bats, the Lone Scout, the Slitherbound, and my spells to take out flying units, since my big guys can't do that and are susceptible to them. Then the Bolf, the Curse Bearer, and the Slitherbound are all really good into high health tanks. Now, one card that does give me trouble is the ATG drone that we talked about earlier. All of my anti-air is pretty cheap. My spells can't kill this, my ground units can't kill this, and so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just push it with the Impetus Blast and shove it over to my master to let him kill it, because I don't really have anything for it. So that's why the ATG drone is really fantastic. But just remember, keep your mana curve around 3.5, have some damaging spells to control what's going on, have some anti-air, have some anti-horde, and have a way to kill tanks and snipers. And when in doubt about deck construction, you can always look at the leaderboards to get some inspiration. Now I will say that right now, this one card is destroying the meta. In the entire history of this game, the devs have never made this mistake, right? Okay, and apparently no one can do basic math, because they released the most OP card in the entire history of the game, and so every single deck is either using it, or using cards that counter it, like the Razor. But this is usually not the case. Usually every leaderboard deck is very different, and so you can get a lot of different ideas and different inspiration. And so, once they nerf this card, and it fixes the broken meta at the moment, you'll be able to go onto the leaderboards, find decks that use cards that you enjoy, maybe even copy those decks, to try to get a feel for how they have reached the leaderboards with that deck. Because even if you copy the number 1 deck, you probably won't win. It'll take you a while to learn how to use that deck and how to use those cards. Because again, this game isn't about using OP cards, it's about using cards in an OP way. Like how you use those cards and your skill as a player. But if we look at the decks, most of them follow the rules that I talked about in this video. They have several cheap cards to capture bridges, they have 2 damaging spells, 2 expensive guys, and then 2 mid-range counters to specific things. Now, again, at the moment, the meta is kind of ruined by this Dreadnought, so even people are even using less spells, because the Dreadnought is just warping the meta, but they will nerf it eventually, and it'll return back to normal. So normally, again, you want 2 damaging spells to control what's going on, no more than 2 high-cost cards, a couple of mid-range hard counters to specific things, and then a bunch of cheap dudes to use as support and as bridge capture. So like one thing about copying a deck off the leaderboards, even though you won't know exactly how to use it or how to use those cards correctly, at least you'll know that the deck is probably balanced. If they've made it to the top 5, they probably have a balanced deck. And so that will at least give you a starting point to practice and to learn cards with, and to learn overall deck construction, rather than just shooting yourself in the foot right off the bat. And also, just avoid wild cards. I forgot to mention that earlier, but especially for new players, using duplicates of the same card can really mess you up. Just avoid wild cards altogether. And on an unrelated note, I want to celebrate me and my friend making the leaderboards in pre-made. You know, it's still early season, so the ranks are still fairly low, but me and my friend Chiefing Houdini have made the leaderboards. Oh, but while we're talking about copying leaderboard decks, be careful about pre-made, because remember that pre-made is two people that can coordinate their deck together. So not all the decks in pre-made will be balanced. Also be sure to differentiate between solo decks and teamer decks. There is a difference between 1v1s and 2v2s. But don't feel bad about copying a deck. Copying a deck will not lead you to victory, but it will give you a good place to learn how they use those cards to achieve victory. But when making your own deck, just be very, very aware of your average mana cost. If your average mana cost is above 4, you're probably going to lose more often than you win. So just be really careful, especially with like Ritual of Servitude. Just do not use this card. This is the biggest noob trap in the entire game. This doesn't actually give you any benefits whatsoever. During the entire game, it might save you like 6 mana by giving you random cards that may or may not be good, and it ruins your entire deck's construction. So avoid Ritual of Servitude, avoid using too many high-cost cards, and then when it comes to crafting cards, don't be afraid to craft. You know, you will get shards as you play. Now, I would say that I try to only craft legendaries because I will get the cards eventually from tokens, but when it comes to all the cards that we talked about today, you will use or see these cards throughout your play experience. And especially the commons and rares, it's really good to just craft those, use those, learn those, then you'll learn how to counter those, how to support your big guys, and you'll get better at this game in no time. Now when it comes to promoting a card, just avoid this. Don't spend your resources on promoting a card. You can get like gold and tokens from doing this, but in general it's a waste of your shards, especially when you're starting off the game. Now one thing you can do is sort your cards by glory, and then click through every single card to see if one of them can be upgraded for like 50 crystals. You know, like if you can get a token for like 50 shards, that's pretty worth it. Plus there are achievements for promoting a card to bronze, silver, and gold tier. So occasionally, you know, maybe scroll through to see if any of them are cheap. The cost of upgrading is based on how many of that card you have. So like if you had 11 out of 12 of this card, it would only cost you like 100 crystals to actually promote it. Whereas since I'm missing 6, it cost me 750. You're essentially buying copies of this card when you promote it. You know, so if you're missing 6, you're essentially buying 6 copies of that card. But if you use cards with high glory, it will increase your deck glory, which is how much season pass you get from winning. It will also influence your profile experience as well. You know, but really these things don't matter a whole lot, so don't worry too much about glory or promoting cards. But that's all we got for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, I hope you learned something, and I hope that I could help you out. Let me know in the comments what you did or didn't like about this video, and what you would like to see in the future. And as always, if you have any questions or requests, let me know and I will do my best to help you out. If you like this video, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. That all really helps out the video, helps out the channel, and it makes me super happy. And if you don't know what to say, just tell me hi. I would love to hear from you. But until next time, I've been your host, OmLedu, here to share some tips with you, and reminding you, as always, don't forget to have fun. Bye-bye!